I think I've not in it on my channel that your girl really enjoyed Dragon Age the Veilguard. From the graphics to the combat system to the story to the extensive character creation options, which meant that I have made myself a plethora of rooks, each of them unique, whose stories I am quite eager to experience and dive into because, yes, just as I say in my end card, obsessing over the things I love really is a perfectly valid coping mechanism for me. This even more so with my 8 created rooks, one to romance each of the companions and one I am playing as Arrow Ace just to experience the many varied story beats and options and to see how drastically different the game plays for me based on those choices. Because the thing about BioWare as a studio, and by BioWare, I am not referring to the suits who seem to believe that games only exist in one way and have, together with EA, stripped the studio and its creators of a lot of the experience and heart and people who have brought us these games and characters that we love. No, when I say BioWare, I am referring to the game devs and writers and artists and everyone who actively contributed in crafting these stories and characters and games for us to lose ourselves in. Like I was saying, BioWare as a studio is one that's always been big on characters, what makes them tick, why they make certain decisions, and how those in turn change who they are by virtue of them coming in contact with the player character. It's why Dragon Age the Veilguard would always hold a special place for me because whilst we have all seen the comments about how sanitized the story and the characters became, I instead see so many layers in who they are, what they have to deal with, and how our role as Rook within the story is less to influence them and more to be present with them as they go about this journey to get to the end. And yes, this also includes the character of Taash. Because see, the first time we were introduced to Taash, I was in awe. They were this big Kunari fighting the Antom, trying to protect a dragon, even as they bore the title of Dragon Hunter with pride, and that for me seemed like a conundrum and a contradiction. How could Taash be someone who nerds out about dragons in one breath and in the next joins our party to hunt them down? Matter of fact, hunting down dragons is part of their companion quest that we follow them on in Rivain up until we get to the lair of the Dragon King for some heartbreak and much deserved beatdown. As I played the game for the longest time, I couldn't fathom the why of it until it finally clicked for me that is the entire point with Taash. They were born to a Kunari mother who follows the way of the Qun and were raised in Rivain with its way more relaxed rules and ways of being, and being caught between both paths is a central part of their characterization. The dragons are an extension of that. Before I started Dragon Age the Veilguard, I was convinced that either Lucanus or Nev were going to be my absolute favorite character. Emmerich, of course, honed my art, hence why I romanced him first, but for the others, I was torn about who I was going to love the most. I did not see Taash coming and how their story resonated so deeply with me. Now, before anybody says anything, you are allowed to your opinions on Taash, whether or not you like them. What I am doing is bringing the perspective of someone who has always been torn either which way with her own identity by virtue of birth and the place within which she was raised, and how that tears you apart and makes you defensive in so many ways, which people tend to react negatively to. I've gone into detail about why the character of Lucanus is an allegory for the sexual assault survivor, trying to heal and decide what path they want to take next on their journey. I've talked about Hardin's story being one that speaks to the trauma of indigenous groups trying to battle the anger that's born by what their ancestors have gone through as they try to decide on what is next for them, whether to fully embrace all that rage and what it contains, which is just as valid a response, or they want to look to the life they've created outside of that trauma and what letting go of it would mean for them. And in both of these cases, I've been able to relate heavily with these characters, and the same can be said for me with Taash. Now, the thing about being a Nigerian is that tribes are a big deal for us. You are known and identified and bound by them, usually the tribe of your father. But sometimes, and in certain situations, there will be people who would also ask about your mother's tribe. Both matter. My dad is Edo, my mom is Delta, and I was born in Ibadan, a Yoruba town where I grew up and spent my formative years. And the one thing I've always felt as a child was this feeling that I didn't belong. Like I wasn't Edo enough when I was with my paternal relatives, that I wasn't Delta enough for my maternal family. And whilst I could speak Yoruba fluently like a native, my name immediately gave the game away that I wasn't Yoruba. It felt like I could never truly claim any of these identities that should ideally be mine. And that fueled a lot of my rage in my childhood because I constantly battled with feelings of insecurity and inadequacy about not fitting in anywhere. And I see this quite clearly with the character of Taash, who I have noticed that for the longest time, whilst we were all playing the game, a large portion of the fandom wrote off as being rude or annoying or childish. And whilst, yes, I do agree that Taash was written as the youngest of the companions, what with them being in their late 20s, I still think that some of those who can't seem to stand or understand them also do not realize just how much of a psychological toll being torn either which way with regards who you are and what culture you belong to and accept can have on a person. Taash as a character is clearly written to represent the child of immigrants, one whose parents have left their home country for a better life for their children, a life that they hope would be one where these kids get to thrive and also never forget their roots or their origins. It is a responsibility, a burden placed on the child that is never really addressed or discussed, even in present day. Because usually the children are aware that their parents or parent probably had a thriving life and career in their home country, something that they gave up on became lesser than they were, all for the sake to give them better opportunities than they had or would have had back home. And so you have this color, the choices that they make, the decisions that they take, and how in turn they navigate their lives constantly with this realization that on them rests so much of the sacrifice of their parents, which in turn is a constant refrain in their brain, wherein should they totally assimilate into this new place that they are now in, or should they also maintain a bit of that knowledge of where they are from, even if day by day their memory of the place seems to be fading. It's a situation that always breaks my heart, and we see this very much applied to Taash and Shathan. At some point, Shathan tells our Rook that she's very much aware of how abysmal she is as a mother because she was never meant to be one. The Kyun recognized her abilities as a scholar, that is who she is. If she had raised Taash among their people, she wouldn't have been the one to bear the burden of having to parent her child because Taash would have been put into the care of those properly trained and equipped to raise them. And yet Shathan makes that decision to leave with her child and instead come to Revain, all for Taash's protection, to keep their fire-breathing abilities a secret from those within the Kyun who would have sought to exploit Taash for said abilities. What she did for her child, to protect her child. But it doesn't mean that she can just let go of the traditions that have defined her all her life. And so what she does is try and instill the ways of the Kyun in Taash. Taash, who buckles underneath the strict rigidity of said life, because part of them being non-binary is this desire not to be defined so strictly, and that is something that they know the Kyun would never truly understand or accept, and yet they try anyway. The ropes are symbolic of this. Now, I am still miffed about the fact that the game forces us as the player character to be the one to have to help Taash make the decision on whether or not they would follow the Kyun or embrace the fact that they might have migrated to Revain as a child, but it doesn't make them any less Revainy even as a Kyunari. It pissed me because I hope that that was a decision that we could have left Taash to make on their own, because it seemed more fitting for us to give them our thoughts and then let them decide on what path they wanted to take. Us being the one to make that final call will never sit right with me, because I always choose to have them embrace their identity as Revaini. Because just as with them making the choice to identify as non-binary, rejecting Shathan's suggestion that there is a more accepted way by the Kyun for them to identify themselves, choosing what custom and culture they want to take on as their own should be a decision that Taash gets to make as well. And that is the one part of their story that dampens things a bit for me. Because like I said at the start, Taash for me represents the child of immigrants who have been exposed to a different culture and way of life and have found themselves assimilating and calling this place home, even as they battle with feelings of inadequacy, because whilst they call this new place home, they also are distinctively not native to the land, and that can be seen from their features, and thus it builds in them this feeling of alienation, because whilst they know that there is this whole other place with people who are similar to them, this place that should ideally be home to them, they've been away from it for too long that it's become foreign and strange. And yet this new home of theirs as well also has the barrier where they don't really fit because they are different. Plus, there's the immigrant parents in the background who wants them to both never forget home, but to also fit right into their new home to take advantage of the opportunities present within it, and the choice of where they go with, or better yet, how they find a way to balance both aspects of these cultures, because they are both, is one that they should get to make. If I would have made a slight tweak to that particular quest, it would have been having we the players given one of those two options. Suggest Taash either choose the Qun or choose Remain instead, and whichever choice we go with, we are instead hit with Taash informing us that whilst they respect our suggestion, they instead would rather choose to find a way to incorporate both in their lives, as they are drawn to both and would find a way to create a new path for themselves, one that honors their Qun side and their Remain side. I don't know, it might seem small, but for me it would have made for quite the compelling choice and would have fit the central themes of Taash's character arc better. Of course, this is just me and my thoughts. I would as always love to hear yours, whether or not you agree with me. Please drop them in the comments. Like this video if you've watched this far and haven't done so yet. Share this if you want. Support me on Patreon if you can. If you can't, however, do consider checking out my other channels. One is my gaming channel and the other holds my ASMR content. I have both linked in the description box if they sound like something you might be interested in. Whichever the case may be, however, I will see you on Monday with a new video. Until then, do remember, obsessing over the things you love, perfectly valid coping mechanism.